Good morning. This is Whitney Phillips. I'm here with my buddy Phil Vernon. Phil, you can kind of come in and say hi to everyone. He'll be
Hello, everyone.
He'll be talking to us a little bit later. We good, Jerry? Okay, sounds like we're good. Oh, Marlene says she can't hear. Can anyone else not hear me? Can anyone hear me?
That's a good reason.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, most people can hear, is what they say.
If they can't hear, they can initiate their audio.
If you cannot hear, you didn't initiate your audio, but you can't hear me. Can you chat that, Jerry? So, good morning. Thanks for joining us. You got a reminder about this webinar kind of at the last minute. So Phil is a temporary employee here that's been tasked with helping us prepare our data for entry into the metadata dictionary. And so when we talk about that today, he will be able to talk to us about some practical ways to implement and collect all of that information. So this is today's agenda. We'll be talking about two recent Senate bills that were passed by the legislature. That's Senate Bill 102, which is Senator Maine's Student Privacy Act. And then we have SB 163, Second Substitute. It's a mouthful. That was, I believe, spearheaded by Senator Andrade, the senator that is the reason we're all here, who he sponsored the Student Data Protection Act. And so there's some changes to an existing state statute that I want you to be aware of. I also want to go over proposed USBE board rule changes that will directly affect your lives. These rules were brought to the Law and Licensing Committee, I believe it was April 21st. They will be brought to Law and Licensing Committee again tomorrow, actually, and then hopefully discuss with the board, the full board, on Friday. The Policy Advisory Group has met just twice, and I wanted to let you know of what that focus is. If you can recall, the Student Data Protection Act requires that the state board designate or appoint three members to three advisory groups. The I guess highest group, or the one that's more in charge of recommendations to the board and that provide recommendations for any kind of statutory changes, is called the Policy Advisory Group. The next level down is the governance group, and then there's the users group. Those that would actually we want to know at all different levels how a change will affect everyone from bottom up, and if there are changes that need to be made to statute or to board rule, that's also negotiated. So we're all kind of working together. We have a few members of those groups that span all three groups. They give a lot of their time and their talents, and we sure appreciate their willingness to serve in all three groups. This provides some kind of cohesion between the groups, and so they can speak to the conversations had in all groups. So very excited to have this group together, this policy advisory group. We have Senator Andrade on that group. We have two board members, Carol Lear and Joel Wright. It's oftentimes also attended by a few other board members. They're welcome to come as long as I believe there is not a majority, because it is not an open meeting. And then next on our agenda, we'll be talking about, we mentioned what Phil is here for, the Metadata Dictionary. I want to share some cactus anecdotes and then share with you some upcoming trainings that I will be providing this summer, so that you're welcome to attend. You'll need to register for some of them, but also you'll know where I am, so that if your LEA or school has questions around the dates that I will be there, I'm very happy to meet with your IT directors, superintendents, teachers. So if any way I can be of service, let me know. We also plan on hiring on a student data privacy trainer in the next while, very soon, I'd say in the next month or so, and also an auditor by July 1st. So there's a lot of words on this page. I apologize. But Senator Maine asked that each LEA maintain and create a list of, I labeled this list, this is not in legislation, but employees with access to educational records. It includes the names of positions at the school level of who has access to educational records. And the next slide will define what educational records are. Now, this list needs to be provided to the local school board. I believe that's annually. And that every employee that has access to educational records needs to be provided a training on student data privacy laws. After the training has been provided, the school will need to provide to their local school board or charter school a certified statement saying that each employee was trained on student data privacy. Does the state provide a training template? We will. As soon as a trainer is hired, we will we will provide you with a curriculum for training for various groups. I'll talk more about that a little later. The training, I believe, needs to be conducted annually. So a lot of schools, they've decided to have this training for their onboarding process. Some of those are deciding to make this part of a staff meetings, professional development. It's our focus as soon as a trainer is hired to provide you with videos that you can use for these trainings. And of course, you can provide your own. Yes, I got an email. Will these slides be available? Yes, these slides will be available as well as the recorded, this recorded webinar. They are posted on our website, and so you can use them. It usually takes a few days for this to get loaded onto the website, so give Jerry a few days. So that is SB 102. Now, what are educational records? Well, a lot of things. Here's a definition I got from PTAC on educational records. It would be very difficult to name an employee that does not have access to these records. This bill therefore means that all employees need to have training on data privacy. And we'll talk about that a little later. To jump into the next Senate bill that was just passed, this is the second substitute. First of all, there's a few things that this did. Number one, it changed the definition of targeted advertising. The word on the street is that Google is going around to different states or folks like Google and asking them to change the definition. Google does with using the Google services in schools. They have said that they do not want to track the history of a student's online behavior through multiple occurrences. So on a Monday, the student goes and Googles a particular subject. On Tuesday, they do Wednesday, and throughout the week that they will not have a behavioral record for students. But they do say on a very singular occurrence when a student is online researching volcanoes or whatnot, that there may be ads that pop up in relation to volcanoes, but the student's behavior will not be tracked. So the definition of targeted advertising was therefore updated. With the ever-changing way that technology works, I imagine this will not be the last time that this definition is changed. So that's been done. Another thing that's been done is folks like vendors like ACT or SAT want to make sure that some of the services they provide are compliant with state law. For example, if you remember taking the ACT, do you remember taking the ACT?
I do.
Yeah, or the SAT?
Both. I took both.
Did you take both?
I took the ACT twice.
There's, oh, did you?
I did.
Oh,
I did better the second time.
Oh, so did I. So ACT has a questionnaire that is optional for students to take that asks the student various questions. And the intention of this questionnaire is to use the data to provide the student with, you can see here, opportunities for institutions of higher education or scholarship. And we have asked that if there is a service that requires, that would like to use the data to get information, for students to receive information, that they'll need a parental consent from their parent, or if the student is 18 or over, from that student. Just to clarify, this is for other vendors, for many other vendors, such as Utah Futures, and this provision in ACT does not require parental consent. So I apologize, there's a little bit of a difference there. The student can say that they would like to receive information if it is a national assessment. So that separates national assessment like ACT and SAT from other vendors that would require parental consent. It also asks that that data be expunged only on a case-by-case basis. This is because certain companies like ACT are not just assessment vendors, but they also conduct a lot of research that they use student data for. And so this provision was also put in place. Okay, so we're done with the changes to those very new statutes. Let's talk about the proposed USBE board rules. This is a modification of R277487, which is, I believe it's called the confidentiality, data confidentiality, or I can't remember the exact title. What this does, what I've learned is that we're not simply going to copy and paste state statute into board rule that has quite a bit of redundancy. What we do is we incorporate the state statutes. So number one, we've incorporated the Student Data Protection Act, as well as the Student Privacy Act, the SB 102 that I mentioned at the beginning, and then we write any kind of additions, or we don't modify, but any way that we can practically implement complying with the requirements of state statute. So here we have a requirement proposed in board rule that by October 1st, so we wanted to give you a little bit more time. It's actually due July 1st as far as state statute, and that remains in place. But USBE would like a copy of both your data governance plan, which is required for you to publicly post by July 1st, but we don't want a copy of it till October 1st. And an additional requirement that may be incorporated with your data governance plan, or it may serve as a separate document, is the LEA Information Technology Security Plan. And this is defined as being able to describe the policy around, I think, about 10 different topics, which include educational application approval processes. Remember, the last webinar was on vetting educational applications. Part of that technology security plan includes a requirement for your LEA to determine what process that might be. And so those are some additions. Number 2, we have the metadata dictionary. As you know, it is required in state statute, but board rule is requiring you to submit to our own metadata dictionary that we are developing, that we will talk about today. Number 3, that the LEA training on data confidentiality that's mentioned in SB 102 that requires data privacy training to be given to all employees who have access to educational records, which are a lot of people, that you provide me with that certified list that schools are also providing to the LEAs. And this is to help us keep track of which schools may need assistance in providing trainings and make sure that we're all compliant with state law. Number 4 here is that this is a USBE responsibility that we create a training for educators on student data privacy. That is because of number 5, which is a proposed change that educators, in order for them to receive relicensure, would need to take student data privacy training, and that would be provided by USBE. Let's see, there's a gray box covering, I see. That is probably because I can see myself. Here we go, sorry about that. Someone mentioned that there is a gray box covering it. I think it's because there's video that I can see. Let me try to move that so it doesn't bother you. Okay, great. So teachers starting in school year 18-19 would be required to take this training. It would be, we're imagining it would be very similar to the suicide prevention training that is required. Although that training, it's pretty lengthy. I took that training. This we're hoping to be a fairly short training that's accessible through probably UEN site. Okay, so those are the proposed updates. These are not board rules yet, but these are what have been proposed. And email me if you have any suggestions on that. They're also available through USBE. You can see all of our agenda items. Let's see. Okay, before we get, I'm going to move this box again so you can see. There we go. The policy advisory group that I mentioned, where Senator Andrigg is on that, also board member Carol Lear and Joel Wright, as well as some LEA student data managers are part of this group. And I wanted the group to focus on 3 major areas that we would be working on over the next, I'd say, 8 months or so till the end of the year. Number one is to work on training, developing training materials. We know that 95% of data breaches are due to employees making mistakes. We want to minimize that by providing training to USBE staff, LEA administrators, and educators. Number two, data collection processes. This needs to be outlined under what conditions does USBE need to collect additional data items, especially student-level data items. Obviously, there are some things we're required to report on through federal reporting requirements, also state reporting requirements. This would also go down to a much a different level to where certain folks may want to ask teachers, give them a survey on their preferences of instruction, or there could be a number of kind of ad hoc surveys that have been requested. In fact, I've gotten 3 survey requests over the last 2 weeks, and I haven't gotten survey requests in the last 6 months, so it is definitely on my mind. What is the process in place here? And of course, once we are able to create our policy or a tighter policy, there are existing policies, but a better, more comprehensive policy, we'll share that with the LEAs for them to use as a model. Number 3 here is something that's going to take a little bit of time. The Student Data Protection Act requires that certain student-level data elements be able to be expunged by request, or that there are particular record retention schedules for more sensitive data elements that would include disciplinary data and medical data. There are a number of things that we need to figure out. We're working with state archives and to figure out how the laws, the state statute is a little vague, and I think it was purposefully so that we can figure out what a medical record is one question. What does expungement mean? So a number of questions that we have. If you're an expert in any one of these areas you see there, let me know. We have a few people here that know quite a bit about these areas, but if you're looking at this and you're saying, oh, I know a lot about this process, you may be able to assist. Please let me know. This is a major focus for us right now. Okay, here is your to-do list for the Student Data Protection Act. You see in red there the Metadata Dictionary. And here is, I'm going to move my box. Let's see. Let's see over down here. The Metadata Dictionary, what is this? We've talked about this before. This would be student-level data elements. These are data that are collected, used, stored, and shared. And the "and" there is particularly important. That's why it's red. The "and" means that all data that are shared from the LEA outwards to external third-party vendors, to researchers, to other agencies, anything that is shared needs to be in the metadata dictionary. If the word there were "or," then we would have to outline all the data that are collected, all data that are used, stored, or shared. So that and's important there. That's how we have, this is what the statute says. We're trying to follow exactly what the statute asks for. But there's also a requirement, if you remember, that there's a data disclosure statement that needs to be a standalone document that describes all the data that are collected. And so that would be a separate document that you could put together. We're almost done with USBE's data collection disclosure statement that we'll be publicly posting by July 1st as well. Each data element needs to be designated as necessary or optional. This is defined in the Student Data Protection Act. You do not need to define what is necessary or optional. We at the state will let you know through the guidance we've gotten through the Student Data Protection Act what data are necessary and what data are optional. This is because it's already given to us, it's already defined for us. We do not need to agree with or come up with different ways to describe necessary or optional. We're going with the definition we were provided. The data element needs to be described as being required by state or federal law. This is a little tricky because data elements often are not explicitly required by state or federal law. The student data backpack legislation does explicitly state data elements that need to be collected for the student data backpack, but oftentimes federal and state law tell us to do something. For example, we need to assess students for proficiency in English language arts, math, and science. Now, how do we do that? Well, one way that we do that is we've hired an external vendor, and we need to share student data in order to operationalize the assessment system, the SAGE system, for example, or ACT, for example. ACT would not know who the 11th graders are unless we provided them with some student data. Therefore, in the metadata dictionary, we're asking that the state or federal law that justifies the acquisition of vendor services be stated, and that the data element is not necessarily attached to a state or federal law, but the vendor is, and all of the data that the vendor receives are then therefore somehow justified under the law. So that's the logic that we've been following. That's because we weren't able to do that any other way, but we wanted the purpose of the metadata dictionary is to be as transparent as possible with the data that we are sharing and why we are sharing the data. And so the why is the justification for state and federal requirements that we get. The last item here is that it needs to be publicly displayed on our websites. I think it just says publicly displayed. I may have added website there. So you would essentially have a link to the metadata dictionary, which would be housed within the data gateway, and USBE will maintain that metadata dictionary. You will be able to enter in information with particular user access rules. Will be able to enter in information, and that will be providing guidance on that on the next webinar in June, the specifics of it. So before we're able to enter in data into this system, we want to give you some guidance on how to prepare to enter that data, because first of all, I'm sure you don't have it all lined up right now, all of the vendors, the data elements, and it does take some time. So over the next month or so, I suggest collecting the following data elements, and this is where Phil comes in, because Phil has been doing this for us at the state. Do you want to take over for a minute?
Sure. Take a breath.
I'm tired. I'm going to take a breath.
So if you have any questions, please stop me and we'll try to clarify just kind of conceptually what we're looking for. It's fairly straightforward, but some people in the past have had some questions. So as you can see, this will be based on an Excel spreadsheet, which will basically have 5 columns. And all of these, each cell within the respective column will be required. We'll have some other cells later that we'll talk about that will be optional, that might be beneficial for your just kind of spring cleaning or organizational purposes. But these 5 are absolutely required. So thank you. The first, as you can see, will be, and again, most of this is straightforward. So if you have any questions, feel free. Pop them up. The data recipient is required. Just need to know who please.
Yeah, exactly. And this, you have the example here as an outside vendor, but this is also, data are also shared with external researchers. And that also needs to be documented. Now, if you're sharing aggregate data with an external researcher, or with a vendor, not sure why you would do that, but if you were to, you don't need to document that. These are individual student data elements. This is PII that we're talking about. It's not de-identified data that needs to be put into the metadata dictionary.
So this is kind of important, the subtitle, because obviously you have certain entities that come back time and again and work on various contracts, and just so that contract can be separated out for its respective purposes, there's going to be something called a subtitle, which is just an addendum to the entity's name. We noticed here that there are multiple contracts with these vendors for various purposes. We use the Utah Educational Policy Center for a few projects that we have here, and so we would spell that out and then have a project name, just 1 or 2 words. If you only have one contract with the vendor, then this is not necessary. So I would just leave that out. But this is to help just distinguish what the vendor function. So when we said all of those 5 were required, as Whitney just said, that one could just have an NA, but something has to be entered.
Yeah.
Okay. This is perhaps the most important and oftentimes confusing column or cell within that spreadsheet. It's, as Whitney kind of alluded to earlier, the justification, which pretty much can be broken down to, why do you have a relationship with whomever the relationship is with? You have to have a reason why a contract was drawn up or an agreement was otherwise arranged. And a lot of times the justification can be found within the document itself. Sometimes it's specifically laid out within one of the elements of the contract, or the terms. That's what I was looking for. The terms of the contract. Sometimes it's not so clear, and you're going to have to kind of dig into why did this get created? Why, especially for people who are inheriting situations. Why was this done? Is pretty much going to have to be the question that's going to have to be answered. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario, you go back to the go back to the entity themselves, but that could be kind of embarrassing. So you'd really prefer not to do that. You'd rather keep it in house. But on a couple of occasions, in researching it for you guys. Mm-hmm. I had to encourage one of the groups to reach out to their contractor and ask, do they have a document an original document.
And I think this is a learning opportunity for you because oftentimes there are contracts in place and they're providing services, but no one quite knows why the services are being provided, why there is a contract. And it's helpful to know that there is a federal, state, or board rule or a local decision that why you are contracting with this vendor. And this also, because this is publicly posted, would help in justifying the sharing of student data because you are fulfilling requirements for, you're not just hiring this vendor for no reason at all. And sometimes this might be just a vendor just to help with operationalizing some of your functions there at the LEA. There might not be a federal or state requirement or a board rule, but the justification may be that it just assists in operating the LEA. But remember, only include vendors that you are sharing student PII with. We do not need vendors included that are for other purposes because we know you have contracts for lots of different purposes. You have, vending machine contracts that you don't share student PII with, I don't think.
Landscapers.
Landscaping.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And one thing this we've found here is it kind of gives a chance, as I said earlier, for you to do some spring cleaning. Mm-hmm. Most importantly is to see if the contract is even still in effect. Mm-hmm. There have been instances where contracts are either on the verge of or once or twice even have expired, mm-hmm. Which is fine. Some of those contracts have renewal clauses, but a lot of time those renewal clauses have to be co-signed just to activate the renewal process. So you wouldn't want to be operating under a contract that's expired or in limbo. That could open up a can of worms I'm sure you don't want to get into.
And that does kind of bring up another point. We want current contracts, not former contracts, just contracts that are in place right now. This is an annual requirement for this information to be submitted into USBE's Metadata Dictionary by July 1st. So as new contracts come up, you'll need to update that. I'd say in real time if you could, but by July 1st, definitely have a very clear picture of what's going on with your LEA. Let's see. We have 15 minutes. So.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Might not be able to get this box out. Oh, there we go. Go ahead.
So this is kind of, we just broached most of these. Just basically the biggest tip is just why is this contract or agreement even in existence?
And Phil also often uses this word sleuthing. When we interviewed for his position, when he was interviewed, we told him you'll be an investigator. You'll be asking questions. It's kind of working through a little bit of a labyrinth of how do we find out all of this. Some contracts are written so beautifully, aren't they?
Yep. Absolutely.
And this has actually inspired us to revisit our contracts so that this information is easily accessible because of this requirement. So you may eventually be looking at updating your contracts as well. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and just one thing in between these two is whoever the gatekeeper is for all this information, motivating them to do it under this tight time frame might be a challenge, but it's something that you're going to want to figure out how you can achieve because some people, sometimes it might take some time looking for the justifications, and it's going to take a little bit of sleuthing, as Whitney said, and that means time away from whatever that person may have been doing, but it's something that's just going to have to be done.
let's see. Okay, description.
Okay.
Is this a required element?
Description. Well, you
This
changed
is
it.
this is what the contract seeks to accomplish. For example, provide the SAGE assessment would be for AIR, and here are a few other.
Yeah, I think
examples.
I think these are
The optional.
the optional, what we call the optional.
Well, there's a description.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There's
I don't
yeah,
know my
there
own spreadsheet.
there is a text within the metadata dictionary entry screen. There's an ability to put in some text, and this will be the description of what exact services that they're providing. It can just be as short as these one sentences. I've seen Colorado has a metadata dictionary. Hold on, Platt. Oh, I disappeared. Or you might want to go into more detail. Platt, will you resend that? I'm not able. I can see it as it comes up. It'll pop up, and
It
then
fades away too quickly.
It'll fade. So kind of copy and paste and send that to see. With the name of the company providing the this, are you talking about educational applications? Sorry, it pops up. Yes. Oh, okay. Yes. Educational applications will eventually need to be put into this metadata dictionary. I am not asking for that to be put in quite yet, unless it's kind of an educational application that is used for all of your schools within the LEA, or if you're a charter school. So anything that's a census application, please include that. But at the teacher level, using the application, technically that would be necessary to put in the metadata dictionary, so if you're able to do that. But that is something that I imagine would be very difficult to collect all of the information on all the applications that teachers are using. Certainly it's required, but I think we understand at the state that you'll need additional time to comply with that. We also are looking into various ways in which we can work together to vet educational applications. We've talked about that last week. For example, having a consortium, and it seems like that type of work to be done with a consortium might be more important to tackle before we input this into the metadata dictionary. At USBE, we don't really use educational applications. We're not, we know that they can be very useful. So I don't know if that's vague enough. Is it required? Yes, ultimately is required. But I think we'll understand if it is not done by July 1st. If you're able to, that would be just fantastic. He's just saying, great, thanks. Stop talking about it and don't change your mind.
Move on.
So we want to comply with federal and state law. We think it's important. These are written for really good reasons, but we also know that getting everyone compliant will take some time, and so we're prioritizing. We're trying to give you these responsibilities kind of in stages, or else you might all quit your jobs. So we're trying to have practical application. So anyway, you're oozing with. Okay. Oh, guys. Okay. Oh, yeah. So we have here, Phil, data elements. This is the fun one.
Yeah, this is the one where basically you have to be as descriptive as possible. just in-house here, there have been a couple times where people would just give, well, kind of just share this and that with those people. And that doesn't really quite cut it. You need to know exactly what you're sharing with what people. Those are just, but obviously two of many. They can come in the form. Let me back up. They probably won't be able to fit into the cell in the Excel spreadsheet. This might be one where it's C attachment or whatever, because a lot of times people here work off of grids, for example, and those grids obviously can't just simply be pasted into a cell, or there might be 75 elements, again, not easily just pasted into a cell. So these are things that are probably going to require a secondary document. You can just see C supporting document or something like that, and then they get added into the dictionary manually based on that.
Exactly. So in your preparatory work, you might want to have an Excel sheet that has, what we're describing as columns, but for this, exactly, you can't fit it all into a cell. You can certainly do that if you would like. We are basically accepting, we work with data stewards here, that we are accepting any form that they would like to provide us the information to make their lives as easy as possible, and then we'll be able to enter that information to the metadata dictionary. One thing that I wanted to let you know, let me go back to this slide. One thing I wanted to let you know is when an LEA will log on to the data entry screen, and we plan to walk you through that process in the next webinar. Phil will walk you through it because he's the one that's actually going to be testing the system very shortly. So we got pushed back about 10 days behind schedule right now, but it's really hard when you start developing a tool in February. So, but we're doing this as quickly as possible. One of the things that you should be aware of is that when an LEA logs onto the system and they log on and they're going to enter in the information. They may type in a vendor, let's say Imagine Learning. They type in Imagine Learning. Imagine Learning will come up, and maybe Imagine Learning has a bunch of subtitles too, and so maybe there's, I'm just guessing, something for elementary education and one for secondary education. They'll say, oh, well, this is actually, we use the elementary education. But so you'll see, and I see your question. Hold on a minute. So you can click on that, and that will appear. And that will appear because our Rockstar LEAs will have already inputted this information, and you, as the someone coming. What I was saying is, if you're the first LEA inputting this information, you'll have kind of a blank screen to put in the data recipient, subtitle, justification, description, and the data elements. But if you're the second or third or subsequent LEA to put in this information, you'll see the data recipient. You can click on the subtitle. You'll look at the justification, and you can modify that. Say, no, that's not the federal law that we're working under. This is what we're working under. Or you don't like the description. You'll see the first person description, but you can modify that. For example, some of you have contracts with messaging systems that notify parents if their student's absent and whatnot. And some of you have the gold version, or some of you have the silver, and some of you have the bronze. Some of you have the rust, right? And so not all of that information will be the same. So you'll want to customize that, but at least you're not starting from scratch. And then you'll be able to see all of the data elements that the first LEA. I'm looking at you, Alpine. Alpine's a high letter grade, we're high up on the alphabet. Alpine, you can do this. So we're going to have that first LEA put in all of the data elements that a particular vendor receives. And you can't just select all. We want you to take a little bit of thought, and so therefore we want you to kind of acknowledge and check off all of the data elements. Student first name, yes, we do that. Yes, we do that. And so we tried to make it as easy as we could, but also wanted to keep the integrity that you will have to make sure you'll have to make sure that is put in. Sorry. These you guys, your comments are hilarious, and now I'm getting sidetracked. Now they're changing. Alpine's now changing their name to ZZ something. Now they're,
but what you're saying is probably important because you don't want to just check all, because remember, this is going to be public.
Yeah.
And so the more accurate it is, the easier it will be should you get any inquisitor coming in and asking you about it.
Yeah.
If you can reduce to actually what's shared and why it's shared, then you won't be tripping over yourself.
Yeah.
Having to defend things that you don't even share in the first place. So
now we only have a few more minutes, so I am going to just let you know that USBE decided to kill two birds with one stone. And so we asked Phil to not only collect the information that is required, but we asked him to collect a different, more information so that we were better able to catalog our contracts. For example, the amount of the contract, the approval date, when it expires, a particular vendor number, is it affiliated with a specific USBE department like assessment or CTE? What kind of FERPA? Actually, the FERPA exception is required. The FERPA exception is a required element.
So we're going to have to adjust that. So that's going to be a sixth column.
I apologize. The FERPA exception is also required, so I'll actually update these slides and that one slide and add that. A FERPA exception, there are a few different exceptions that FERPA provides for sharing of personally identifiable information without consent. They are, number one, directory information. Platt asked the question about educational applications. Some of you may use directory information for your teachers to use educational applications. So if that is all you need, directory information, we have on the website a form of what that means. Each LEA is required to define what directory information is. I heard a story yesterday from that there's a university called BYU. Some of you may be familiar with it. BYU has multiple campuses, BYU Provo, BYU Hawaii, and now not Ricks College, but BYU Rexburg, or Idaho. It's in Rexburg. Do they all have the same definition of directory information? I'm kind of leading. This is an obvious one, right? No, they don't. One of the universities thought it was just fine to have photos as directory information, and that can be fine. The other university thought, no, we don't want to include that as our definition of directory information. Directory information needs to be defined at the LEA or school level. I recommend the LEA level so that you are consistent. USBE cannot define directory information for you. That's not the point. The point is for it to be customizable. Getting back to the FERPA exceptions. Sorry, we're already over a little bit of time. Sorry. We have directory information. Another exception is school official. This is when a particular vendor is doing work on your behalf. My assumption is that the majority of these contracts are the reason we can share PII without parental consent is because of the school official exception. We also have an exception for what is it called?
Audit and evaluation.
Yes, thank you. The audit or evaluation of a federal or state program, a federally or state funded program. And the other one is to improve education through conducting research or evaluation of particular programs. And that would be more related to the external researchers that you share data with. And don't want to go too much over time, but one of the provisions in the Student Data Protection Act is more restrictive than FERPA. FERPA says that we can share student PII for the sole purpose of research and evaluation. Student Data Protection Act says that we cannot share PII for the sole purpose of research and evaluation. This has changed the way we do business here at USBE, and it should change the way you do business at the LEA level. You can share student-level de-identified data, but not PII with external researchers. If the evaluation is done is conducted for the purposes of evaluating a state or federally funded program, that's different. That is not just for a researcher to write an article and hopefully publish and not perish. So
just real quick, those optional columns, as we're calling them, in addition to the apparently 6 required columns, since you're going to already have the document in front of you, this just gives you a real clean, quick way of seeing where you're at. I mean, it can help your funding mechanisms and just to make sure you know when contracts are up for renewal or if they're about to expire. Just integrating these optional columns really, I think, would have a lot of benefit since you're already having the document open anyway.
Now, I'm going to fly by these, but you will have the slides. They'll explain what those are. Moving on to just our last bits of information for the webinar, we've been getting some interesting anecdotes when teachers call in to our help desk asking practice questions or emailing. They will often email their username and password or say their username or password, or they'll provide us with their social security number. Don't do it. And not that you're doing it. You've never done this, I'm sure. But please maybe just keep in mind, let your teachers know that sending this sensitive information through email is not secure. This happened yesterday, too. I mean, it happens from time to time. I also told you I wanted to let you know about some upcoming trainings that I am providing, and because I'm able to hire a trainer soon, if you would like me and or my trainer to come visit your LEA and provide trainings to administrators or teachers, we're happy to provide that service pending availability and resources. So we have upcoming trainings here. I'll be in Richfield June 5th. I was just told that I'll be giving the same training, I think, 3 or 4 times.
Fun. Lucky you.
Yeah. Actually, and that's the same as the Student Advocacy Services Summer Conference. I'll be giving the same training, I think 4 times, 3 or 4 times that day. So I'll also be on a panel at the National Conference on Student Assessment in Austin, Texas. So come visit me there, and we'll have some barbecue. I don't eat meat. And then I'll be at the Rural Schools Conference in Cedar City. And so you can either come to one of those. Some of them you'll need to pay for or register for, so I can't just invite you. But also I wanted to let you know where I was so that it's convenient, if it's convenient for me to come to your school, your district office, and provide additional assistance or just meet with you. I'm happy to do so. So that is the last slide. Thanks for letting us start late and run late. If you have any questions, you can ask them now or forever.
Or email
forever
you
hold
who
your
has your
peace.
email.
Yes, or email me. We've heard a lot of good work out there, just to be honest, and the word is spreading. We're getting a lot of phone calls about student data privacy, and so we know that you're spreading the word as well. So we sure appreciate it. Sounds like a lot of people don't have many questions. Let's see. Okay. Oh, Marlene, I'm sorry. I don't know I didn't realize that there was the role in the data gateway was created, and I sure appreciate that that it was. I don't think it's operational yet. In fact, you're the one that told me it was up, so obviously I don't know much about it. That I'm going to know. The metadata dictionary entry screen is not yet complete, and so even if you had access, it wouldn't be to anything. So we will be on our next webinar, June. When is the next webinar?
I'd have to go.
It's probably June 7th, June 1st.
It's the first week, I think.
The first
sometime.
is a Thursday, so June
second week.
7th. This is a Monday. A question about the data governance plan. A data governance plan is basically a compilation of a variety of topics. We have, I've put the pieces there, but what I'll do is I will request it posted today, kind of a one document that's the data governance plan that's based off of USBEs. Our data governance plan, just to be honest, and I'll be telling the Law and Licensing Committee tomorrow, it is weak in two areas. It's weak on our data collection process, kind of the front end, and the very back end, the data expungement process. And that's because both are very, very complicated, and so those need to be beefed up. But it certainly is an improvement to what we have documented now. So I'm happy to share that with you, although you should just keep in mind that the data governance plan is never, ever finished. It's never done. It will always, I guess, be a living document.
It evolves.
It will always evolve. Do you remember when you were kids? Can you imagine the capabilities that we can watch television on our phone? I'm just shocked. I'm so surprised. So there's a lot of updates that need to happen ongoing with the data governance plan. So it's always a work in progress. But I'm happy to post that. I will get that up by tomorrow, and I'll request that these slides and the video be up as well. I see Jerry back there stretching a bit. We'll see if he does that. So we'll get that up, by the end of the week for sure. So email me if you have any questions, and do my best to answer. Thanks for all your hard work.